January 1944, outskirts of Monte Cassino. A cold mist hangs over the valley as German officers gather around a lantern-lit table. Inside a reinforced stone farmhouse, the walls tremble with distant artillery. Maps lie scattered across the wooden surface, marked with fresh pencil lines showing a planned counterattack, one designed in secrecy. Transmitted by Enigma just hours earlier, the generals speak quietly, confident that their encrypted orders are known only to them. Then a runner bursts through the doorway. His face is pale, his breath sharp. He reports that American artillery has already begun targeting the exact assembly points for the counterattack, locations no Allied scout could have seen, positions chosen only minutes earlier. The officers freeze. Impossible. No reconnaissance planes. No patrols intercepted. No spies reported. Yet the Americans are already adjusting their fire, already shifting their infantry, already reinforcing the very ridge the Germans plan to exploit. One general steps back from the map, his voice almost a whisper. The Americans know. Before we do, a silence falls over the room, not fear, but disbelief, and in that moment, an unthinkable truth begins to take shape. Long before German generals realized their plans were exposed, the foundations of America's intelligence machine were already being built, quietly, methodically, and with a scale the Axis powers never imagined. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, it was far from an intelligence powerhouse. Its cryptology teams were small, scattered, and underfunded. But the shock of Pearl Harbor triggered an unprecedented mobilization, new intelligence schools, massive code-breaking centers, global interception stations, and a fusion of military, civilian, and academic talent that would soon form one of the most formidable intelligence systems in history. The Germans, however, saw none of this coming. Their confidence rested on a single machine, Enigma. To them, it was unbreakable. Enigma's rotating electrical rotors produced millions of possible letter combinations. German operators changed settings daily. Messages were encoded, transmitted, and decoded with mechanical precision. High command believed it provided perfect secrecy. Generals planned operations with the assumption that every order sent through Enigma was invisible to the enemy. That belief shaped German strategy from North Africa to the Russian front to the mountains of Italy. This confidence was reinforced by early victories. Blitzkrieg movements seemed proof that mobility and secrecy were firmly on the German side. Even when setbacks came, German leaders saw no evidence that their communications were compromised. They blamed losses on bad weather, Allied numbers, or poor execution, never on broken codes. Meanwhile, in the United States, a different story was unfolding. The Army Signal Intelligence Service, SIS, rapidly expanded. Hundreds of young mathematicians, linguists, and analysts were recruited from universities and trained to break complex ciphers. By 1942, they operated from a massive facility known as Arlington Hall, working day and night in long rows of desks filled with punch card machines, frequency charts, and intercepted German messages. Germany never suspected the scale of America's effort because U.S. radio intelligence networks were quietly spreading across the globe. Intercept stations in Hawaii, Ascension Island, Alaska, Australia, and England captured German signals thousands of miles away. Every transmission, even the short, burst-coded messages meant for frontline commanders, was recorded, filed, and sent to cryptanalysts. German generals assumed their communications were protected. American analysts were already reading them, even when the U.S. did not fully decrypt a message. Traffic patterns alone revealed critical clues: which units were active, which commanders were present, which supply routes were open, and which fronts were weakening. These insights shaped American planning long before German officers understood that someone was listening. This growing intelligence advantage converged with another powerful factor: the Allies' cooperation with British codebreakers at Bletchley Park. Though the U.S. did not rely entirely on ULTRA, the transatlantic exchange strengthened American operations enormously. German generals had no idea their encrypted signals were being analyzed simultaneously onto continents. By early 1943, American commanders were increasingly receiving intelligence reports that predicted German movements with uncanny accuracy. Divisions shifted hours before German attacks. Artillery pre-registered targets Germans thought were secret. Supply dumps were relocated in anticipation of enemy moves. And yet German officers continued to trust Enigma completely, setting the stage for the shock that would come when they discovered how deeply the Americans had penetrated their plans. By the middle of 1943, the U.S. intelligence machine had matured into a vast, coordinated network capable of gathering, decoding, analyzing, and distributing German military information with astonishing speed. What German generals never realized was that the Americans were not depending on a single breakthrough, but on a layered system, built from thousands of small advantages that, together, created a decisive edge. At the heart of this system was Arlington Hall, the U.S. Army's primary code-breaking center. Former school teachers, mathematicians, statisticians, physicists, and linguists worked in converted classrooms filled with IBM punch card machines humming day and night. These men and women weren't soldiers, yet their work influenced every battlefield where American troops fought. Unlike German intelligence, which remained rigid and hierarchical, American cryptology thrived on collaboration and constant adaptation across the ocean. The U.S. Navy's OP-2OG unit operated similarly, intercepting and decoding German naval traffic. Submarine routes, supply schedule, and coastal defenses were exposed long before German admirals realized their encrypted communications were vulnerable. The Americans didn't just listen to high-level messages. They studied weather reports, maintenance logs, and even personal notes sent between units. Every transmission was a clue. Asterisk German command remained blind to this. Enigma, they believed, was mathematically unbreakable, and technically they were right. What they didn't know was that their operational habits made the system predictable. Repeated message formats, careless operators, reused phrases like nothing to report, and rigid daily schedules created patterns that American analysts exploited. The Germans never imagined that someone in Washington or London was charting their behavior. With scientific precision, even partial decryptions changed battles. If only 30% of a message was solved, American analysts combined it with radio traffic volume, troop identifiers, and signal direction finding to reconstruct the rest. German generals assumed silence meant secrecy, but to allied intelligence officers, silence was often more revealing than speech. This advantage became visible in North Africa. American commanders began receiving briefings that predicted Rommel's fuel shortages, supply delays, and unit placements with uncanny accuracy. German officers later admitted they were baffled at how quickly U.S. forces adapted, shifting armor and artillery to positions only a clairvoyant could foresee. They blamed spies, reconnaissance aircraft, even luck, never imagining their encrypted messages were being read before they themselves saw the reports. As the war progressed into Italy and France, the intelligence gap widened. American field commanders increasingly relied on decrypted German messages for planning. Orders were adjusted within hours. Ambushes were avoided. Counterattacks were blunted before they began. German generals noticed the pattern but refused to believe their communications were compromised. Their faith in Enigma remained absolute, even as evidence contradicted them. By late 1943, one undeniable reality was emerging. The Americans were beginning to know German plans before German officers had fully read them. This truth, invisible in the moment, would soon become painfully clear on the battlefield, when entire operations collapsed under the weight of secrets the Germans never knew they had lost. Before American generals ever saw a decrypted German message, thousands of ordinary men and women spent endless hours in cramped rooms, turning chaos into intelligence. These analysts, many in their early 20s, worked at long wooden tables stacked with intercepted radio signal, coded groups of letters, statistical charts, and punch card trays. The hum of IBM machines never stopped. The smell of ink, paper, and machine oil filled the air. Days blurred into nights as operators deciphered fragments of Enigma traffic piece by piece. They were not soldiers on a battlefield, yet their workload was relentless. Mistakes meant lives lost. Delays meant convoys ambushed or units trapped. Analysts lived with the pressure silently. They slept in brief intervals, surrounded by cots tucked between machines. Cafeterias served meals at all hours because no shift ever truly ended. Some analysts developed repetitive strain injuries from working punch card machines. Others went months without sunlight. The stress was magnified by secrecy. They could tell no one, not spouses, not parents, not friends, what they were doing or why they worked such impossible hours. Their victories were celebrated in silence, their failures buried in classified files. But their output shaped the war. Every time a message cracked, every time a repeated phrase exposed a pattern, every time a direction-finding station triangulated a German signal, these analysts gave American commanders a tool German generals never expected: foresight. The human toll behind this silent army of cryptologists formed the backbone of an intelligence system powerful enough to read German plan, almost in real time, long before frontline commanders understood just how deeply their communications had been penetrated. For American field commanders, decrypted German communications transformed the battlefield into a map of predictable patterns. What seemed like intuition or bold tactical instinct was often the result of intelligence reports delivered hours, sometimes minutes, after German generals transmitted their orders. Before a German armored division moved, U.S. commanders already knew its fuel levels, supply shortages, and operational objectives. When German artillery units prepared a barrage, American batteries pre-registered coordinates and opened fire first. When German infantry shifted positions under cover of darkness, American patrols appeared on the flanks, ready to disrupt them. German officers were stunned to find U.S. units blocking routes they considered secret. In North Africa, this advantage shaped the aftermath of Kasserine Pass. In Italy, it influenced the timing of Allied advances. In France, it guided the breakout from Normandy. Commanders such as Patton and Bradley often issued orders that appeared to anticipate German thinking. They were not guessing, they were reading traffic decrypted at Arlington Hall and Bletchley Park. But the intelligence didn't only reveal movements, it exposed shortages. Analysts knew when German divisions were short on ammunition, when fuel convoys were delayed, and when units were weakened by casualties. This allowed Americans to concentrate their strikes at the exact moment German formations were most vulnerable. Tactically, it created an imbalance far more powerful than numbers alone. German generals believed they were concealing their intentions with Enigma. American generals were preparing countermeasures before German staff maps were even distributed. This tactical asymmetry became one of the quiet engines of Allied success and the seed of German disbelief. No factor contributed more to Germany's downfall than its absolute faith in Enigma. From junior officers to field marshals, the belief was universal. Enigma traffic was impenetrable. This conviction shaped German planning, reinforced operational habits, and silenced doubts whenever anomalies appeared on the battlefield. German doctrine expected secrecy to compensate for shortages. In manpower and production, commanders often relied on speed of communication to execute complex maneuvers. They assumed only German eyes could read their orders. As a result, they transmitted everything through Enigma: supply updates, troop placement, reinforcement requests, movement orders, even weather reports. When American units repeatedly countered German moves with uncanny precision, many German officers blamed reconnaissance failures or espionage. A few suspected intelligence leaks but dismissed the idea that Enigma could be at fault. After all, the machine was mathematically sound. The rotor system created millions of combinations. Operators followed strict key-changing procedures. Field manuals insisted it could not be broken. This overconfidence blinded German command. They ignored evidence that Enigma intercepts were being exploited. They dismissed warnings from cryptologists. They refused to alter operational patterns that analysts at Arlington Hall had charted months earlier. Even when entire operations collapsed unexpectedly, the possibility that the Allies were reading their communications was unthinkable. It was this arrogance, or rigid belief, in technological invincibility that prevented Germany from understanding why the Americans seemed to react faster than logic allowed. By the time the truth became undeniable, the war had already turned irreversibly against them. The impact of decrypted German plans would have been wasted without leaders capable of using the information effectively. Fortunately for the Allies, American high command in Europe, Eisenhower, Bradley, Patton, and their senior intelligence officers understood the strategic value of signals intelligence with remarkable clarity. Eisenhower viewed decrypted Enigma traffic as a weapon equal to tanks or aircraft. His headquarters received constant intelligence summaries detailing German unit movements, supply bottlenecks, and reinforcement patterns. This allowed him to plan large-scale operations with a precision Germany could not match. Bradley, known for his methodical approach, studied decrypted messages to anticipate German defensive arrangements. Patton, aggressive and instinctive, used intelligence to strike at weak points before German commanders even realized those weaknesses existed. But the true strength of American leadership lay in discipline. They understood that acting on intelligence too openly could expose its source. Orders had to be framed in ways that appeared based on reconnaissance, not code-breaking. Positions were reinforced subtly. Attacks were delayed due to weather when in reality they were rescheduled based on German movements decrypted hours earlier. Defensive lines were shifted under the cover of darkness to counter plans that German generals believed were still secret. The Americans practiced a careful dance, using the information to win battles while hiding the fact that they possessed it. This required restraint, patience, and precise coordination between intelligence officers and field commanders. The result was a series of operations where American moves seemed almost prophetic. For German generals, the effect was unsettling. Their forces were blocked, flanked, or outmaneuvered again and again, as if the Americans were reading their thoughts. And of the greatest challenges facing American intelligence officers was protecting the source of their advantage. If Germany suspected Enigma was compromised, they would change the system immediately, eliminating the Allied edge overnight. To prevent this, the United States and Britain became masters of deception. Every decrypted message had to be used with caution. If the Americans learned a German convoy was en route, they couldn't strike it directly without a plausible reason. Instead, they staged lucky reconnaissance sighting or redirected patrol aircraft into the area to create the illusion of chance. When German forces prepared counterattacks, Allied commanders moved troops subtly, claiming adjustments based on terrain or weather. Even when American artillery preemptively struck secret German positions, the official explanation was often captured prisoners revealed the plan. The Americans even planted false clues to mislead German intelligence. Recon flights were ordered to circle areas already identified through decrypted messages. Spies were fed information the Allies had already acquired by radio intercept. Field commanders were instructed never to reveal how early they knew enemy intentions. German generals noticed the strange coincidences. They saw U.S. units shift hours before their attacks. They saw their supply columns targeted in remote valleys. They saw Allied armor appear at exactly the wrong moment, and they struggled to understand why. The counterintelligence effort succeeded. For most of the war, Germany believed its encryption was impenetrable. This allowed the Allies to continue exploiting Enigma until the very end, turning hidden knowledge into decisive advantage. Behind the strategic brilliance and battlefield success lay a moral challenge rarely discussed: the burden of knowing enemy plans but being unable to act fully on every piece of intelligence. American analysts and commanders had to make painful decisions about when to use decrypted information and when to withhold action to preserve the secret. There were times when Allied leaders knew German units would attack, but intervening to obviously risk revealing the source. There were convoys that could have been destroyed, but striking them without reconnaissance cover would have exposed the code breaking. There were isolated American patrols that could not be warned without compromising intelligence channel. The weight of these choices hung heavily on those who handled the decrypts. For the intelligence officers, this ethical dilemma cut deep. They had to balance saving immediate lives against preserving the long-term advantage that would save many more. Every decision was a calculation. Is protecting the secret worth the cost? History shows the Allies often chose to protect the secret, even when it carried a human price. German generals, unaware of the moral complexity behind the scenes, interpreted the Americans' foresight as uncanny tactical intuition or exceptional luck. Only after the war did they learn the truth. Their plans had been visible to their enemy in a way no military leader could anticipate. The moral dimension of this intelligence war remains one of the most difficult aspects to discuss, because victory required knowledge, restraint, and the willingness to accept consequences that were never publicly acknowledged. August 1944. The outskirts of Falaise. During the final days of the Normandy campaign, the German 7th Army is desperately trying to escape through a narrowing corridor. Under relentless Allied pressure, inside a field headquarters camouflaged beneath apple trees, German generals huddle around a large operational map. Exhaustion lines their faces. The room smells of sweat, dust, and burned fuel. They argue quietly about the timing of a breakout attempt. Every movement must remain secret. Every order must travel through Enigma. And every decision must be made before the Allied news closes completely. By late evening, the generals finalize their plan. A breakout will take place before dawn. The panzer divisions will strike west toward Macedon, while infantry regiments push south to reopen the corridor. Enigma operators quickly encode the orders and transmit them in short bursts. The generals feel a brief sense of relief. At last, a plan concealed from Allied reconnaissance. A plan the Americans cannot possibly anticipate, but miles away, at an Allied signals intercept post. The coded messages are already being processed. Within hours, American and British analysts extract enough key phrases to determine German intent, direction of thrust, approximate timing, and unit composition. The decrypted report is rushed under strict seals to the American command group. Before sunrise, senior officers issue their response. Armored units reposition along the exact axis of the planned breakout. Artillery battalions adjust their fire patterns, calibrating for the predicted German push. Air commanders prepare fighter bomber squadrons at dawn. Soldiers who had been resting are awakened and moved quietly into blocking positions. Every adjustment is subtle enough to seem like normal battlefield maneuver, yet precise enough to strike exactly where the Germans will attack. Back in the German command post, the generals wait for the first distant explosions. That will signal their divisions have made contact. But the explosions arrive too soon, and from the wrong direction. American artillery opens fire not on expected defensive positions, but directly on the German assembly areas themselves. Shells land with terrifying accuracy. Trucks are shredded, radios destroyed, infantry scattered. Before the panzer crews can even start their engines, Allied fighter bombers were overhead, diving straight onto the roads the Germans intended to use. The commanders are stunned. No reconnaissance aircraft had flown overhead. No patrols had approached. No German courier had been captured, yet the Americans were already waiting for them. Not by chance. Not by intuition. But because they had read the plan almost as soon as it was created. A German staff officer rushes into the headquarters, shouting that the breakout route is blocked. Another reports that American tanks have taken the ridge. That was supposed to be the starting point of the operation. A third confirms that artillery fire is landing with impossible precision, as if the Americans knew the exact minute the Germans would move. The generals stare at their map in disbelief. How could the Americans anticipate every detail? How could they strike before the Germans even launched their offensive? How could a plan developed in secret, transmitted through their most protected system, be countered before the first troops moved? One general finally says what no one else dares to speak: our enemy knows our orders before our own soldiers receive them, and in that moment, the truth becomes undeniable, not yet fully understood, but impossible to ignore. The Americans are inside their decisions, and the war is slipping out of their control. The shock that sweeps through the German headquarters in the Falaise pocket is not merely tactical, it is existential. As reports continue pouring in, the scale of the disaster becomes unmistakable. Units that were supposed to spearhead the breakout never even reached the start line. American artillery, guided by decrypted signals and precise intelligence, strikes every assembly point with deadly timing. Columns disintegrate before they can move. Panzer crews abandon their vehicles under relentless fire. Officers attempt to reorganize, but every fallback position is already under attack. To the German generals, it feels as if an invisible hand has anticipated their every move. They order their signals officers to verify that Enigma settings were correctly changed. The operators insist the procedures were flawless. The rotors were aligned. The code books followed. The message groups double-checked. Everything was correct. Yet the Americans behave as though they had received copies of the orders themselves. A senior German commander stands over the map, gripping its edges so tightly his knuckles turn white. He mutters that the Allies must have supernatural reconnaissance. Another speculates about spies in the headquarters, a possibility that terrifies everyone present. But the truth is far stranger than espionage. The Americans do not need spies. They have mathematics, machines, linguists, and thousands of unseen analysts working around the clock to unravel the German war effort. As the breakout collapses, German officers ride to forward positions to see the disaster firsthand. What they witness confirms their fear. American tank destroyers are already entrenched along roads the Germans intended to use, positioned in places where Allied scouts had no opportunity to observe. Infantry units stand ready behind minefields laid only hours earlier. Machine guns cover routes that appeared hidden on German reconnaissance maps. Every fallback track, every alternative approach, every possible escape corridor blocked. It is as if the Americans wrote the German plan themselves. One Panzer officer later recalled in a post-war interview, "We moved exactly as our orders directed. And at every point, the Americans were already there." Meanwhile, American commanders coordinate their response with calm efficiency. Intelligence summaries arrive faster than German officers can react. Bradley notes that the Germans walked into our guns as if guided. Eisenhower, reviewing the maps, immediately understands that the German army is being crushed not only by force, but by information. Allied air power seals the sky, pounding every road the Germans attempt to use. Inside the German command post, disbelief turns to dread. Officers now realize the truth. Their most secure system, Enigma, may no longer be secure at all. Some still cling to denial, arguing that this is coincidence or the result of exceptional Allied scouting. But the pattern has become undeniable. The Americans know too much. They anticipate too accurately. The timing is too perfect. Another staff officer whispers the thought others fear: if they know our plans today, they have known them all along. The collapse of the Falaise breakout becomes more than a battlefield defeat. It becomes a psychological breaking point. German generals begin to question every assumption that underpinned their strategic doctrine. Their confidence in secrecy, the foundation of maneuver warfare, begins to crumble. For the first time, senior German leadership confronts the possibility that the Allies have penetrated their invisible battlefield, their communications. And though they still do not understand how deeply the Americans have infiltrated their encrypted world, the shock from Falaise marks the moment when German command realizes a terrifying truth. The enemy has been inside their plans for far longer than they imagined. In the days that followed the collapse of the Falaise breakout attempt, the German command structure began unraveling under the weight of a realization. They were still unwilling to state openly. The Allies were anticipating their moves with impossible accuracy. Reports from shattered divisions described the same pattern. American units blocking retreat routes that had been selected in total secrecy. Artillery firing on assembly areas within minutes of their designation. Air attacks concentrated precisely on the roads German officers believed were safely concealed. These were not coincidences. They were symptoms of an intelligence advantage Germany could neither explain nor counter. Asterisk field commanders reacted first. Many became hesitant, slowing decision-making out of fear that every new plan would be intercepted and exploited. Orders that once moved swiftly through staff channels were now burdened by layers of paranoia. Some divisions began transmitting less frequently, hoping silence might restore operational security. Others reverted to couriers, but couriers were too slow for the pace of modern mechanized warfare. Every attempt to regain secrecy cost the Germans time, and time was something they no longer possessed. Meanwhile, the Americans accelerated. Intelligence summaries flowed from Arlington Hall to Shaft headquarters with increasing clarity. Analysts tracked German fuel shortages, unit transfers, and reinforcement delays. They identified collapsing supply routes, crippled communications networks, and divisions operating at a fraction of their listed strength. Armed with this knowledge, Allied commanders launched operations with surgical precision. Whether it was Bradley's encirclement tactic, Patton's sudden armored thrust, or coordinated air-ground strikes, each move exploited information the Germans believed was hidden inside German headquarters. Frustration turned to alarm. One general at Ob West reportedly slammed his fist on a desk, shouting, "We cannot fight an enemy who sees through walls." Another wrote in his diary that the Americans appeared to move inside our thoughts. Desperation bred mistrust. German counterintelligence officers launched investigations for imagined traitors, interrogating personnel who had no possible access to operational planning. Radio operators were accused of carelessness. Liaison officers were scrutinized. Even senior staff felt the pressure. Despite having no evidence of espionage, the German command was fighting shadows, unaware that the real vulnerability lay not in human betrayal, but in a machine they still believed unbreakable. As the Allies advanced eastward through France, this intelligence imbalance grew. American units were repeatedly positioned to intercept German withdrawals before they formed. Supply depots were bombed days before they were scheduled to open. Reinforcements were ambushed en route to the front. German generals complained bitterly that the Americans fought with strategic foresight no reconnaissance could provide. The psychological impact was corrosive. German officers began altering plans at the last minute, terrified the enemy would anticipate them. But this only worsened confusion within their own ranks. Orders contradicted earlier directives. Units marched in circles, lacking clarity. Retreats turned chaotic. The Wehrmacht, once celebrated for its precision, now operated with growing disorientation. Even then, the truth remained hidden from German eyes. They sensed something was wrong. They knew secrecy was failing, but they still could not fathom how deeply the Americans had penetrated their communications. And as the war pushed toward Germany's borders, this unseen advantage would only intensify. By early 1945, the German High Command was fighting two wars at once, one on the battlefield, and one against an invisible enemy inside their own communications. As the Allied armies crossed the Rhine and pushed toward the heart of Germany, the pattern became undeniable. Every time the Wehrmacht repositioned, the Americans already knew. Every time a reserve unit was withdrawn to create a defensive line, Allied forces struck the weakened sector. German generals watched entire operations collapse before they began. Undone by an opponent who seemed to operate with impossible anticipation, still, they refused to believe Enigma was compromised. In their minds, the machine represented German engineering, precision, and superiority. If Enigma had failed, then everything had failed. But the evidence kept growing. American forces intercepted rail movements before trains even departed. They predicted shortages of ammunition and fuel in specific German corps, and adjusted their offensives accordingly. They mapped German defensive networks days before those units received their own finalized orders. Entire panzer groups were redeployed based on operational plans the Allies had already read. By spring, some generals began suspecting a disastrous truth. General Alfred Jodl reportedly remarked that the Allies operate as if they sit inside our command post. Others noted that their plans were failing with the precision only for knowledge could provide. Yet the German leadership remained divided. Some blamed traitors, some blamed carelessness, some blamed fate. Almost none blamed Enigma. The truth did not fully emerge until after the war, and when it did, it shook German officers profoundly. During interrogations and debriefings in 1945-46, American and British intelligence officials revealed the scope of their cryptanalytic success. German generals learned for the first time that Enigma had been compromised as early as 1940-41, before America even entered the war, and that U.S. intelligence centers like Arlington Hall had been reading their operational traffic throughout the most critical phases of the conflict. Many generals were stunned into silence. Several refused to believe it. Others expressed embarrassment, shock, even admiration. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel reportedly whispered, "So that is why they always knew." Postwar memoirs echoed the same disbelief. Former German commanders described their astonishment that operations they considered airtight had been transparent to the enemy. They finally understood why so many offensives collapsed prematurely, why Allied strikes were perfectly timed, and why the Americans seemed to possess an uncanny ability to predict their next move. At Nuremberg and in later interviews, numerous German officers admitted that learning the truth was one of the most devastating revelations of the post-war era. Their trusted machine, their symbol of technological superiority, had become one of the greatest vulnerabilities of the entire German war effort. In the decades that followed, military academies around the world studied the Enigma failure as a case study in overconfidence, pattern mistakes, and the catastrophic consequences of assuming absolute secrecy. The American intelligence system, built from mathematics, engineering, and vast human effort, became the foundation of modern cryptologic warfare. for Germany's wartime leadership. The realization was bitter and irreversible. The Americans had not only outfought them, they had outthought them. In every war, soldiers fight onto battlefields, the one made of mud, steel, and noise, and the one made of signals, silence, and secrets. The German generals of World War II mastered the first battlefield. They perfected maneuver warfare, trained elite formations, and commanded with confidence built from early victories. But on the second battlefield, the invisible one, they were defeated long before they realized a war was even being fought. The revelation that American and Allied intelligence had been reading their plans for years reshaped how many German officers understood the conflict. Their armies had not been undone by luck or fate, nor solely by overwhelming numbers, but by an adversary who built an entire science around understanding the enemy's mind. American cryptologists turned mathematics into a weapon, patience into strategy, and information into power. Their work carried no glory at the front lines, yet it shaped every engagement where Allied forces seemed impossibly prepared for the German. Learning this truth after the war was not merely shocking, it was humbling. It forced them to confront their own assumptions, their belief in Enigma's invincibility, their dismissals of anomalies, their refusal to imagine that an adversary could surpass them in precision and discipline. It revealed that a machine designed to shield their every intention had instead exposed their greatest vulnerabilities for the American. The victory in the shadows became a quiet legacy. No medals, no parades, only classified files and decades of silence. Yet their contribution proved something profound, that intelligence, when shaped by skill and sacrifice, could shorten wars, save lives, and steer the course of history. And so the story of German disbelief, the moment they realized the Americans knew their plans before they did, stands as a reminder that in modern war, brilliance can be as decisive as bravery, and that the greatest battles can be won long before the first shot is fired.